But I want to start off with a really important question.
Yeah.
Do you condemn Hamas?
Look at Piers Morgan's show and James Wood. There's just shouting match, battering each. It's a boxing match. It's an intellectual boxing match. Not really intellectual at times. It's just, you don't get the physical blows. But that's what it is. It's entertaining. Do you know when you watch it, it's actually enjoy. You could sit down with a glass of a cup of tea and watch it almost like a show, right?
I almost thought you were gonna say a glass of wine there, bro.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You're through to the Islamic Vibes podcast. I'm your host Majid, and today I'm joined by my guest, a special friend, Brother Kam, the tech guru from Voice of the Ummah. Assalamu alaikum, Kam, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan for inviting me. Inshallah, looking forward to it.
Pleasure's all mine, and I know it's going to be an explosive episode, but I want to start off with a really important question.
Yeah.
Do you condemn Hamas? Not really.
Great question.
You don't need to answer that.
No.
How are you doing? How are you doing anyway? You good?
Alhamdulillah. Oh, good. Alhamdulillah. Oh, good. Yeah, I know. It's become a meme, hasn't it? That question, and I think he's going to haunt Piers Morgan when he goes to bed every night because, or not because he's that much of he's that type of individual, insidious sort of individual that will probably smile and laugh at that afterwards, but. For the rest of us, it's just it's become an absolute joke of a questioning.
It has, man. It has. I mean, we'll go into that in quite some depth. But I think it's worth mentioning as well, as the genocide rages on in Palestine, in Gaza. I think it's important, just a message to all the listeners and also to myself first and foremost, really, that this is how humans are. We have a attention span. And when the media is trying to promote something and push something, soon as it sort of goes out of the mainstream, we kind of tend to not forget stuff, but it's at the back of our minds. But the reality is if you check the news, hundreds and hundreds are dying daily, and it's just a sad state of affairs that when 20,000 plus, and I would probably say close to 30,000 people have been killed. Made shaheed. Human nature is funny where 200-300 doesn't sound a lot, but 200-300 people is a lot of people, bro.
It is, and to be honest, as you're saying, we're human, so the more you see the suffering, it starts to become normalized in your head, and you don't want it to, and it really it upset me the other day that I was going through, my telegrams, because that's where I'm getting most of the real news coming through, and that's where you're getting the videos. And I looked at a video, and maybe a few weeks ago I would be crying my eyes out, and then yesterday I wasn't. I was just looking at it, and then I just switched to the next video, and I felt really bad. I was like, how have I lost that emotion in a couple of weeks? Because I've seen so much of it, and then I'm going back, and then I'm forcing myself to cry because I'm thinking I can't lose that emotional attachment. But it happens because we're seeing it so much. And actually, a side point, the press we're seeing all these journalists and stuff dying. They've come out and said, look, we're going to stop sending images now, because what's the point? It's almost like sadomasochism. We're showing you our deaths and nothing's happening, and you lot aren't helping or doing anything. So to be honest, you don't deserve this press. You don't deserve this journalism. We're not going to go and show you anything. And they're getting fed up almost, like, what the hell? How can we keep showing you dead babies and nothing's happening? So it's a bit like that. It's horrible.
Yeah, definitely. And there was one kind of last point on this before we move on. There was a video a while back now, maybe a month ago, of a brother who was, sending a message to the Ummah at this time, and he was saying, look, the reason why we're sending you these photos and videos is so that basically on the day of judgment, you ain't got no excuses. You can't plead ignorant. Like we're not expecting anything from you now after what's happened. However, we're showing this to you because on that day you will be accountable for this.
Exactly. No, that's a top one. Because I actually mentioned almost identical to that on the khutbah I did this last Friday. So I did a khutbah last Friday, and I mentioned that before when we think about the suffering of Muslims, we couldn't see it or hear it. So it was more of you use that term, I hear no evil, see no evil, or see no evil, hear no evil, and you couldn't really put yourself in that position. But now we're hearing it and seeing it for our own eyes. We have no excuse. Like the dua of the oppressed is literally in our ears. It's not just somewhere miles away in another country where we can't hear them calling out for help. They're literally calling out for help to us each individually.
100%, bro. 100%. So let's move on. Let's move on. And the discussion for today's topic, it's really an important one. And just to give you, the people listening, a bit of backstory. Personally, last couple of months, when speaking to Muslims about what's happening, especially in the UK, and especially younger Muslims, right? One theme has come up quite a lot, quite consistently, and it's about Muslim guests, Muslim personalities, being invited as guests on the Piers Morgan TalkTV show, uncensored, right? And what the discussion really is revolved around, who did better? Was it Mohammad Hijab? Or this guy was a bit weak and this guy did better. And the discussion has been around this, and I've been thinking for a while because I've got my own views on it. But it just seemed like, this was something where there were varying emotions. Some people were like happy that someone went on and, gave it to them. Others were like, bro, why did they go on there? They know what the agenda is. Then, they know they're going to be made to look like, someone who supports Hamas and stuff like this. Why do they go on there? Other people are pro people going on there. Other people are kind of like, anti people going on there, right? But then I came across your blog titled Manipulating Muslim Influencers, the West's Covert Agenda Unveiled. And this is what I wanted to discuss to you about today on this episode, because I think it's really important. And I will share the link to this blog within the sort of description section.
Yeah.
I just want to read out the first paragraph for the benefit of the people listening and watching, and then we can sort of kick off, right? So you started this blog off by saying, on the back of the destructive events in Palestine, there has emerged a shift in mainstream media to allow a perceived balanced discussion on the Israel-Palestine issue. While this is welcome news to the Muslim audience, one cannot help but wonder why. Has the West had a change of heart? Is there a collective sense of guilt when oppression is so clearly displayed to the world by the Zionist occupation? Or is there something more dark at play, a sinister plan that aims to dissect the Muslim Ummah upon their thoughts and place them upon a spectrum devised 20 years ago by US think tanks? And as the podcast title is, what is the hidden agenda? So over to you, bro. I want to hear your thoughts on this blog that you've written.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was something that was brewing in my mind for a while. Maybe the first speaker that came on Piers Morgan, which was Mohammad Hijab, you wouldn't be able to tell there's anything going on because he's a big figure. He's got millions of following. He's a heavyweight in terms of Muslim influencers. You would probably say he is the most influential Muslim at the moment in terms of talking intellectually, not just about, you could say Khabib and stuff, but they're boxers. They talk about boxing, whereas this guy's talking about Islam, right? So at that point, I thought, okay, no, this is good. It's actually still interesting that he'd still get audience with Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan brings on Ronaldos and the Messis. Why is he bringing on mainstream, or sort of what we would class mainstream for ourselves, Muslim speakers that are eloquent and could actually throw some punches back and actually upset the agenda. And I don't want to really sort of go into all of each individual sort of talk or interview, but what really hit home for me is the following guests that came on, and looking at this, to us they're all big. The Dili Husseins, the Andalusis and the Lowkeys, and they're all, to us, they're big because we're in that zone. We're in the Dawah space. We see their content day in, day out. They're almost as big as Ronaldo to us because we see their content more than we'll see a footballer's content. But to the normal, we're not talking about just the Muslim. This is Piers Morgan show is for the wider audience, for the whole of the UK, for wider internationally. So this is now you're talking about the non-Muslim audience you're tapping into. And then you wonder why is the Adnan Musa's, the ones with like maybe 80k following on YouTube, coming on James Wales show, which is just as big, quite a big show, and it's been getting a lot of views as well. And you've got people like Andalusis, and you've got people like Lowkey is generally quite big, but then you've got other individuals that have very small following, and the non-Muslim audience has never heard of them. Why are they coming on? And that's where I think I want to start it off by saying that's where I had a bit of suspicion of something's going on here. They're getting the same type of people on, as in the same type being, they have the same worldview. They believe in political Islam. They believe in a khilafah. And these same speakers have been doing talks not long before this, the interviews, maybe a couple of weeks before, on the issue of Palestine, where they've openly called for khilafah. So like you saw, like before, I hadn't actually seen Mohammad Hijab and stuff call for khilafah, but the talk he did in, was it Bedford or wherever it was? I can't remember what it was now. Yeah, and there was Dilly Hussein and basically all the same people that came onto the Piers Morgan show. Andalusi was there as well. They all spoke about khilafah. So they all have this similar or same worldview of that, Islam needs to dominate from a political perspective. And that made me wonder. And then what really made it hit home is when I realized there's not been the usual suspects. Where are the secularists? Where are the modernists? Where are the reformists that usually get the space in mainstream media? Why are they just been silent? Why have they been sidelined? And it can't just be that they want to bring on people, bring on one side and just ask them to condemn Hamas. There has to be a wider goal. So that's a bit of my thought process around it. I don't know if you want to go into any more specifics on the questioning, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, when these people were coming onto the show, obviously we knew Piers Morgan's history, how he goes about and how he doesn't let people speak and his agenda and so on. And but when certain names were mentioned, like Mohammad Hijab and stuff, I'm not sure if you were there. We were at a talk in Birmingham.
Oh yeah.
And Mohammad Hijab was there, and he gave a talk, and at the end he said, "I'm going on Piers Morgan show," and everyone was hyped because they know that normally what we've seen is not just Piers Morgan, but generally on these TV shows they always bring these softies on, right? And who get annihilated, and you're thinking, why did you go on that show? But now you're thinking, okay, this guy can hold his own, right? But we saw on the day the sort of line and questioning. And I don't want to go into how I personally think people perform.
Yeah, no.
Because that varies. I mean, some people think that Mohammed Hijab did really well. Others think that Abdul Wahid did well, and so on and so forth. So it's not about that. It's always easy to criticize when you're sitting at home, but when you're actually in the dragon's den or in the lion's den or whatever you want to call it, and someone like the first interview when towards the end when Piers Morgan asked about the two-state. And you could see Mohammad Hijab was in an uncomfortable place.
Yeah, because he's not someone with very much political sort of. He's not a political analyst really. He's more of a, he talks about atheism and converting people to Islam as well. So yeah, that would have been a difficult conversation.
That's what I'm saying. But in regards to the agenda itself, before we get to that, you mentioned in the blog about mainstream media like being an evolution of the printing press. And the fact that mainstream media is a way of spreading the ideology to the masses.
Yeah.
Okay. How does these shows kind of fit in to what you're saying there? So are these shows designed, in your opinion, just to spread awareness or to give information about a certain thing, or is there always a certain agenda that's going to be pushed out through the mainstream media, which serves not just people want to know more information, but actually serves a certain viewpoint of the world?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. we need to realize that mainstream media, and I think we have realized, not just the Muslims, even the non-Muslims, that mainstream media is rigged to a certain agenda. And that's why we've seen a shift from people going onto bbc.co.uk to now just looking at Twitter and looking at TikTok for their news, because people don't believe them anymore. And they've had a lot of stick over the Palestine issue as well. And really the history is that media, not just mainstream media has been a tool of the Renaissance. So capitalism, even in its earliest form, they used the printing press to push secularism across the Muslim world as well. This is what also one of the factors that led to the downfall of the Khilafah in 1924, was that the Christian missionaries came in to, there was the Baghdad center, and there was these other ones that are around the Muslim world that were printing out filth to basically change the perception of the Muslims at the time. And they used this not just in the Muslim land, they used it in South America, they've used it across the world in Asia, they're still using it today in Asia. There's a lot of radio channels which starts off with the word free. So free Korea, free this, free Asia. These are actually all sponsored by the National Endowment for Democracy, which is in America. And it's really proof that they spend billions on specifically media to change the ideas and the ground in these countries to be in favor of capitalism, as opposed to, say, communism in China or Islam in the Middle East. And now we're seeing an evolution of that, because they're realizing that people aren't going on to Sky News, people aren't going on to BBC, people are going Twitter, people are going Instagram, TikTok, all these places to get their news. So they're thinking, okay, we need to adapt our style, but also still get our news out. So what they're doing is they're making use of this culture of quick news, quick entertaining news. So it's like tit for tat battling, that sort of, not the professional news that we used to see. Because look at Piers Morgan's show and James Wood, there's just shouting match, battering each. It's a boxing match. It's an intellectual boxing match. Not really intellectual at times. It's just, but you don't get the physical blows. But that's what it is. It's entertaining. Do you know, when you watch it, it's actually enjoy. You could sit down with a glass of a cup of tea and watch it almost like a show, right?
I almost thought you were going to say a glass of wine there, bro.
Yeah, not just borrowing the glass of wine, but a cup of tea, inshallah. But
yeah. I mean, that James Will show, there's that guy that sits next to him like that frigging poodle. That guy, why is that guy even on there? What, it's entertainment.
And he is very clever. People don't realize.
Okay. He doesn't
look clever, and he's got that face of like, I don't know what's going on. Yeah. And I'll just make side comments, but he is very sharp, because he is the one that keeps James Whale on track with what they're trying to talk about. So when James Whale forgets the name of people like Omar Bakri and people like that, this guy knows all the names. He's just reeling them all off as if he knows the history of Islam in the back of his mind, but he's just acting like an ignorant. But there's really important, and that's probably why he's still there, because a lot of the times the guy's like, why, trying to shut him up and stuff. You think, why are you even there if you don't like him and if you're constantly shouting at him for piping in? But you'll see James Wade, he'll stutter and stop for a bit, and then the guy will pipe in and remind him what we need to talk about. So he's clever, but he's also a very insidious person. Like, for example, he's always saying
again, it brings the entertainment issue. But before we go into the question of the hidden agenda, I'll let you finish. Before we get into the hidden agenda issue, there's a couple of questions I've got, but I'll let you finish, and then I'll go to those questions. Yeah.
So, like I was saying, mainstream media. Now we can see that mainstream media is also a tool of the West to get their essentially their ideology out to the masses, and we've seen this with Piers Morgan, the way he's questioning, the way they're pushing a certain narrative, the way they give the Israelis way more time, way more space, no challenge, nothing. Just you got people like Douglas Murray, like this guy's a full on like hater of Islam. You can see he's so the hatred in what he says and how he says it. Yet he gets full free roam to say as much as he likes, so that those sort of things we've seen that, mainstream media still has that side of, even no matter how much they try and make it entertainment, they still try and plug in their own side quite as much as they can. But But that's when it led me to think. Actually, I started thinking. I was looking, this really reminds me of that article, or not even an article. It's probably more of a report by the Rand Institute. And if people don't know what the Rand Institute are a think tank in America, and they are one of the probably the top 3 think tanks in America, alongside Brookings, that have shaped foreign policy for the US since the Iraq War. So Rand Institute was actually the institute that Bush used to go into Iraq, because Rand Institute are known as the hawkish. They want war. They're pro-war. They're that sort of institute, and they encouraged going in looking for WMDs and the more. But if you read the Rand Institute reports from back then, it was more about changing the hearts and minds of the Muslims. It wasn't about WMDs. It was more about ideological.
But before we come to the Rand report,
yeah,
and obviously everyone keep watching, keep listening, because this is something which every Muslim needs to know. I've got a couple of questions which I am suspecting people will be thinking when they're listening to you, right? The first one being, when we're talking about media and social media, not social media, but we talk about mainstream media, right? Media and mainstream media, this is just a tool, right? It's it's just an instrument. Then it's neither right or wrong, because surely, when Muslims, we use media, and if we had an Islamic State, I'm sure we'd have a media department. So I don't think, and just want to clarify and get your thoughts on it. I mean, you might think different, but there's no such thing as as media being inherently wrong.
No.
However, I guess when you're talking about Islamic media, as in this would be, even if it was debates and stuff like this, it would be fair. It wouldn't be like these slimy people, right, where they hide the truth and push the falsehood and bring those people on. It would be open, fair discourse, because that's just what Islam tells us, commands us to do, right?
No, that's a really good point. So don't take it as, mainstream media is evil and media is evil. Media is anything where you can get information out in a different medium other than speaking. So whether that's paper, whether that's a book, we know media in the Muslim world was the encyclopedia of books, of knowledge that used to go on, the scholars that used to speak about as well. So media has existed from day one, from the first man. But the way they use when we say mainstream media, it's become a concept for the West. It's become something that's loaded with a lot of other understandings, meaning that it's written in a way to change the minds and perceptions of people rather than just giving them information. It's loaded information. It's loaded information to say, this is how you should think. This is what's incorrect. This is correct. Even though they call it free speech, they call it freedoms in the West. Yeah, they're still trying to change our mind. They're not presenting a fair argument and letting us decide. So that's where when we say mainstream media in the West. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't mean media is bad and we should all boycott media. We would become hermits and we would become dumb, stupid individuals that have never read a book in our lives if we boycotted media specifically. But
no, I just thought I'd get a clarification on that, because I thought it was important to mention.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Just because, in a way, you have politics. Politics is universal. However, you got the dirty politics, and what happens is a lot of Muslims, they don't even like linking the idea to politics with Islam, because they see it as something which is being dirty but that's not the point. Just because other people use politics for their dirty objectives doesn't make the concept of looking after the affairs of the people something that's inherently incorrect. So one other question before we go, I want to get your thoughts on this. We talked about mainstream media, we talked about BBC, we talked about all this stuff, right? And the kuffar are using these to promote, even from the days of the Cold War. You watch your Rambos, you watch your Rockies. It was loaded with Cold War messages about the Americans being right and the Soviet being the evil wrong guys, right? So it's always being used for that. Do you think that the West has a big issue now with alternative media, which, as an example, a couple of months ago now, you see people on TikTok saying a couple of months ago how I viewed what was happening in the Middle East and specifically in Palestine, it's changed my complete view on what's happening. So even though they push these platforms to push their own agenda. Do you think there's a bit of where Achilles heel they have, where actually this is also being used in a way where it's actually rewriting the narrative and pushing the correct narrative? And do you think they can even do anything about this?
Yeah, no, it's a top point, because we always bring back that verse of the Quran that they plan and Allah plans and Allah is the best of planners. And this is exactly that. This is again one of the man's flaws, that they think they try as much as they can, but it always backfires if it's from their own akal and it's from their own mind. And mainstream or media and the way it's gone, even in this case, in the Palestine-Israel situation, most people have, really been eye-opened by the situation and be like, this is something they've never witnessed before. And I feel like it has backfired a lot in terms of public opinion, and that's why Israel struggled so much, and they had to draw back at the last couple of weeks, because they were just getting absolutely hammered in the media. But there are also trends that we need to realize that we shouldn't overlook. So where people are saying spaces like Twitter are now, open and free, and everyone can get their views out on that. Since Elon Musk took over, it's become more open and stuff. People need to realize, even people like Elon Musk, their background, and people who did he purchase Twitter off? He purchased Twitter off one of the biggest funders of Zionisms, and he basically gave them billions to then fund Zionism by taking over Twitter. And then he's also got so many. There's been a really good video on Elon Musk's links to Zionism by Press TV, and we'll probably share it on VOTU sometime soon. And so if you do follow VOTU Telegram, you'll find it there. But we need to realize that they are trying to now backtrack and think, okay, if people are going to Twitter for news, let's get our own guy controlling Twitter, make it seem as if it's free and open, and that, look, he's not silencing Trump, he's not silencing the two parties, he's letting them both speak, make it seem open and fair. And then later on down the line, that's when you'll get the advertisements, and then you'll get the pushing into bubbles of not, how Facebook have done it in the past. So we need to be aware of stuff like that. And that shows, like you were saying, it just gives an example of where it has hurt them, but they're also doing steps to now mitigate it and control these social medias and ban TikTok and things like that. Why do they want to ban TikTok if it's a free country, right? So yeah, there's things like that we need to be aware of. And I think people generally people aren't stupid. What happens is a new platform comes up, everyone jumps onto that because they think that's and they're going to be forever playing catch up and forever following it. But what they've learned from this whole scenario, that no matter the whole world blows up and gets angry, yet still nobody can do anything. That's the hold that the capitalists have of the entire world, that we could have a mass outcry and not a single bottle of water can still enter Gaza. So it showed they themselves, they've proved, they've tested the theory that we can do whatever we want at the moment. What do we have to do before they actually blows out of proportion, basically? So yeah, that's what I'd say on that.
Yeah, I mean, just on your last point, I think even though you're right, demonstrations, all this awareness, it hasn't really produced the results that we would like. However, it's this is how things eventually change, because you have ideas, you have concepts, and if people are starting to understand things in the correct way, then that's one step closer to where we want to be. So, but you're right. I mean, the Elon Musk thing is really interesting, to be honest with you, because even TikTok, I know people are called for it to be banned and stuff, but when I'm posting on TikTok at the moment, I think I'm shadow banned, to be honest with you. And even they are really, even they are dodgy.
Yeah,
and that's meant to be a Chinese firm, right?
yeah.
And even things like Chat GPT this is
Yeah.
artificial intelligence.
It stops you from doing a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you do sometimes I'm doing a blog or something like this, and I'll put something in, and
it gives you a bit of a debate. It gives you a bit of a grilling, like,
Yeah, yeah.
no, we shouldn't talk like this about this, and you
it-
should consider talking about it in this way. And you think, no, your job is not to tell me how to think. Your job was to just summarize it like I was telling you to do.
that's the thing, bro. So, and that's meant to be just AI. That's not
Yeah.
AI. It's what we got to understand is it's still programmed by human beings, right?
Mm.
But cool. Listen, I know people have been waiting, um, anticipating for the hidden agenda, the hidden truth
Mm.
behind why people like Piers Morgan and James Whale, uh, who, bringing on Muslims to these shows. What's the hidden agenda, bro? What do you think?
So the hidden agenda is, as I mentioned already, is a report by the Rand Institute 20 years ago called Civil Democratic Islam by a lady called Cheryl Bernard. But obviously, there was a wider team that helped her create this report. And at the time, it was 2004, actually. So, no, yeah, 2003. So it was 20 years ago. So when I last checked the number, yeah, 2003. So this is only a couple of years after 9/11. So this was essentially the West, or the Americans, thinking about how do we firstly put Muslims into a spectrum of their thought. So it's not about Shia, it's not about Sunni, it's not about the Aqidah or anything like that. It's purely about what they believe is the end goal.
Like their viewpoint
Their
towards.
viewpoint. Yes, exactly. Their viewpoint to how they should live. So it's political. It's nothing to do with just how they pray or things like that. Where there's been in the past, we've spoken about them pushing agendas where they're just, pushing Hanafi versus Shafi and causing infighting between Muslims over prayer and things like this. Is a lot more ideological. So this report put us into 4 spectrum, all Muslims. And those 4 spectrums being fundamentalists. So these are the people that believe that Western democracy is flawed, not just flawed, but it's un-Islamic. They believe in an Islamic state. They believe that we should be working towards living under one, and they
Just to
use
just to clarify, bro,
yeah,
because obviously ISIS have made it difficult.
muddied it.
Say Islamic State, we are talking
Yeah.
about Khilafah, yeah?
Yeah, we're talking about the Khilafah. Yeah, we're talking about the Khilafah that was established by the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in Medina. So in that sense, not something where you just go and take a bit of land and raise a flag. It's more ideological than that. So these are the fundamentalists that they'll class. Anyone that believes in an Islamic state being, or the Khilafah being, the solution. They are a fundamentalists. They are someone they need to completely eradicate, attack, and take that discussion off the table. Then there's the traditionalists, are very similar to the fundamentalists. However, they also are wary of democracy. They're wary of Western values, but they just want to live a conservative life, right? They want to live Islamically. They don't exactly know fully what the solution is and how to get there, but they always choose the Islamic option. Whenever you're giving them an option, if a traditionalist comes to if a fundamentalist comes to a traditionalist and says, "This is what we need. This is how we need to go about our lives. This is how you answer your life's affairs," they will agree because they base their criteria on halal and haram, on Quran and Sunnah. So these are the traditional. That's why they call them traditionalists, because they've looked into all of it. The wording is actually very fitting the way they've worded it as well. So it's like they look into the traditional sources of Islam. That's why they're called the traditionalists. Then the third category are the modernists. These are, so there's a big jump between a traditionalist and modernist, and this is where they also struggle. How do they define? You'll see a lot of traditionalists have modern views because they just don't know. But anyway, the modernist is the one that wants Islam to fit in with Western society, but they still don't agree with fully removing Islam from society, right? So that would be the reformists, people like Yasser Qadhi and stuff that come out and say certain things and want to reform Islam to fit in with modern times. Hamza Yusufs and all that kind of stuff. You would class them as the modernists. And then the final one is the secularists. These are the hardcore secularists that say Islam and state are separated. There's no, there's a red line. You can go to your mosques, do your prayers, but after that, you come out, have a mortgage, you drink alcohol, you do whatever, you live in society however just like the Christians have now. So they're the secularists. And so there's there's a spectrum, and they're the four key categories of that spectrum. This is 20 years ago, bear in mind. And in this document, it is so blatant the way they talk about it. Like, the wording is really blatant. And I've got some examples of some of the wording they say. So in what they do is that there's a summary. And if you don't ever want to read the whole 88 pages of it, just read the first few pages, the summary, because that gives you a good idea of what the whole report is about. And in that, they'll tell you aims and objectives for each one of these categories. So the modernists, traditionalists, fundamentalists. Secularists don't have many aims because they don't know what to do with secular. They know most Muslims are going to disagree with secularism, so they sort of focus more on the modernists and the traditionalists and the fundamentalists. But on the modernists, they say that they're going to encourage them to write for mass audiences and for youth. They're going to introduce their views into the curriculum of Islamic education, and to give them a public platform. So this is the West saying, fund them, give them money, give them platforms, put all their content that they're trying to modernize Islam into Islamic education. So they're specifically writing this out in this report. And then another example is the traditionalists. They actually specifically say, and this is word for word, they say, encourage disagreements between traditionalists and fundamentalists. So they're encouraging sectarianism within the Muslims. They even say that word, encourage disagreements. So it's really black and white the way that they've worded this. It's not just, how most of these reports, this very wish-washy, it's worded in a way that you can't pin down and say, oh, that's a bit weird. This is like full on, really spells it out. And another example is on the fundamentalists, they say you need to, and this was in 2003. So after that, we had the Muslim Brotherhoods and Nahda Party and all those lot came afterwards, right? So they said, demonstrate their inability to rule. And we saw that afterwards with Muslim Brotherhood, that they demonstrated their inability to rule, this because they're classed as the fundamentalists, to achieve positive developments for their countries and communities. And then they also say, encourage divisions among fundamentalists. So the wording is absolutely mind-blowing when the way they talk, because this is a public document given to US presidents, and they're clearly saying encourage disagreements, encourage sectarianism, encourage this, encourage that. So it's a really eye-opening document. Everyone needs to read it. And how this relates to now what we're talking about, TalkTV, Piers Morgan, all the Muslim guests that have come on. In this document, it was mentioning you need to really pit the traditionalists versus the fundamentalists. So we would class the Mohammad Hijabs and the Dili Husseins as people that believe in a khilafah, they believe in that worldview. And Piers Morgan is challenging it, making them seem backwards, making them seem, oh, they're just basically terrorist sympathizers. That's what he's trying to get them to say.
So which category do you think your Mohammad Hijabs, Dili Husseins, they fall into? Would it be the fundamentalist category?
It'll be the fundamentalists, yeah. And even on the document themselves, they say they struggle to pick between where on the spectrum you are from fundamentalists to traditionalists, because it's very difficult, because in that spectrum, you've got the ISISes, you've got the extreme people that just want to go out and kill, and there's the extreme elements in that category of fundamentalists. So you can't just class everyone in that. So even they know that it's very difficult to put you on that spectrum in the fundamentalists. But the whole point is that they tried 20 years ago to put us in a spectrum. They struggled for 20 years to put us, because they couldn't really say that people that believe in a peaceful way of bringing back Islam are the same as those that just want to go in and fight and take it by force. So now, how this links with the Piers Morgan show and the James Whale show is that they're bringing on people with that worldview. They're attacking it not just to the Muslim audience, to the non-Muslim audience. We need to realize this is TalkTV, the millions of views that are going on aren't just by Muslims. The majority will be non-Muslim audience. And you'll see from the comments, they're flooded with non-Muslim comments. There's very difficult to even spot a Muslim comment. So you should see the audience is actually for the non-Muslims. And what it's doing, it's just showing the non-Muslim, these are the sort of ideas, if you see in society, you should attack. You should say, this is unacceptable. So they want to essentially create an intelligent state.
And you can see that from just say the Abdul Wahid interview,
Yeah,
where
incriminating him.
basically even before the incriminating bit,
Mm,
you know, the fact that, and actually on the Lowkey one as well, that, you know, they just questioned what even happened on October the 7th. And then the attitude of Piers Morgan,
yeah,
especially on the Abdul Wahid one, was where basically, because even when a few days later, when he was trying to justifying what happened, because he's not getting blazed, like,
yeah,
why didn't you let him speak? He was trying to make out, look, when I hear this sort of stuff,
yeah,
you can't tolerate this.
yeah,
Anyone has come, you know, I'm a normally nice guy, but
yeah,
when people say this sort of stuff, this cannot be tolerated.
yeah. So yeah, exactly. So is it what's this show called? Not Unleashed,
Uncensored.
Uncensored. So is it uncensored? It's not. It's censored because he knows that he can't let them say a certain thing and not get away with it. Whereas Israelis can say whatever they want and get away with it. So it definitely isn't uncensored. It's censored.
And,
And
and
yeah,
just to expand on what you're saying, and I think the Abdul Wahid one is a good example, because here what you're saying is that they're showing that these ideas are not, they're not acceptable by mainstream society,
yeah,
and by having these, and hence why he had Douglas Murray on there, having these, you need to question whether these people need to be employed, and not
mm,
just that, whether they
yeah,
even need to be in the country.
yeah. Now that was the most telling show, I think, the one with Abdul Wahid, because it was brutal. It was like he's trying to get him sacked, he's trying to get him out of the country, and he's pushing this narrative to the rest of the country to say, basically, if you hear people like this, they shouldn't even be working in your company. So yeah, you're right. So that made it really clear for me to. It just brought me back to this report that I read 20 years ago. I was thinking, wait, this sounds exactly like this report where they're pitting certain types of views together and trying to essentially make an intelligent state to out these people. And then what really reaffirmed it was when I read the update to prevent. So the update to prevent prevent has always been one of those things that the Muslims have rejected. They see it as an
Do you want
attack
to just
on Islam.
quickly just explain
Yeah.
what prevent is? Because, you know, this is an international podcast, so there could be
Yeah.
people on here
Okay.
who
Yeah.
don't know what prevent
Yeah.
is.
So prevent is basically the UK's way of countering violent extremism, as they say. But they've now really changed it to just countering what they call extremism. And in their eyes, extremism is anything that goes against British values, goes against Western democracy, right? So anything that disagrees with their way of life is extremism. And other countries will have their form of prevents. They call it, I think, CVE in America. Here, that's called PVE, preventing violent extremism. And they're going to be renaming it to contest. And actually, the word is quite interesting as well, because before, prevent was a very sort of nicey, we're preventing something from happening. Now they're contesting something from happening. Now there's no more the time of trying to prevent it, because they found it as useless. It didn't work. It was overfunded, and funding went all over. People just took from the pot and didn't actually work for them or help them achieve it. So they now changed the wording to contest, meaning it's a battle. It's a battle of hearts and minds. And that's why the wording is actually very key as well.
I actually think where the struggle come, and this is something that you
Yeah.
mentioned in your blog, was that um, they have found it difficult to try to make ideas which apparently are non-violent illegal.
Yeah.
So even when they were pushing this prevent stuff, there were like doctors and people, teachers, who were confused, thinking, "Oh, we've been told to look for signs, but we don't know what the hell we're looking for."
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
and you were getting reports of a kid sneezing and saying Alhamdulillah, and they were calling the prevent officers. They didn't know what they were looking for. So,
Yeah.
and you mentioned this in your blog.
Yeah, exactly. And now there's an article in the new revised prevent, which is going to be in force on the 31st of December this year. So basically effective next year. And in there, they've specifically stated that anyone that believes in a khilafah is now categorized as those that also want violent extremism. They've put it under the same article. So I'll read out that little section that it says. So it says in under threat and risk in the document under Article 23, it says in the UK, the primary domestic terrorist threat comes from Islamist terrorism. Islamist terrorism is a threat or use of violence as a means to establish a strict interpretation of an Islamic society. So they're talking more of like groups like ISIS and things like that that use violence to get there. But then they say in the same article, without even separating out, it says, for some, this is a political ideology which envisions, for example, the creation of a global Islamic caliphate based on a strict implementation of Sharia law. Drawing on political and religious ideas developed in the 20th century by Sayyid Qutb and Abdullah Azam. So here they've put it, and this was different to the previous version of Prevent. They'd never really targeted the idea of just believing in a khilafah and the more peaceful ways of getting a khilafah. They didn't even want to touch that because they knew that's going to open a can of worms in terms of this is attacking freedoms, this is attacking free speech, all that kind of stuff. So they only ever specifically targeted on violent extremism. But what they're finding is that actually that the violent extremism isn't even a threat to them because they themselves create that. They themselves create these groups, fund these groups, and then create proxy wars in the Middle East. So they know about it already more than we know about it. They're the ones that fund them and do it. What they're worried about is then just the normal Muslim that believes in living under Islam again, living under Khilafah. That's more dangerous because they didn't fund that. They didn't want that. They didn't ask for that. They've been trying to secularize us. They've been secularizing our education for how many years that we've been in their countries, and they're still failing, and we're still going towards Islam. So the real fight, and that's what I said. That's why they said the biggest threat is this: it's Islamist ideal. And what is Islamist? Islamist is a Muslim that believes in political Islam. That's all it is. It's just we believe in Islam as a way of life, which is every single Muslim. So they always coin a term because they need to coin it because they can't just call it Islam, right? They can't call it every Muslim. They have to give it a term and then confuse Muslims to think whether am I an Islamist or not. We're all Islamists because we all believe in Islam being a way of life, right? And a political aqidah.
Even though that word is made up.
It's made up, yeah, completely made up.
It's completely made up.
Yeah.
So, and now you can sort of see the ISIS experiment and all these things that have happened where they've been able to link the concepts of khilafah, of jihad, and stuff like this to actual people who they would term as terrorists. Right. So even the term terrorism for them now, it's a very politically loaded term.
Yeah.
Right. Who's a terrorist and who isn't a terrorist, right? So I think if they can push this through.
Yeah. Yeah. And
what does that mean for the normal Muslim?
Exactly. That's what my article was saying. And also I made a TikTok video after that as well, just to warn Muslims, like next year, what are we going to actually see when it goes into force? Is it like there was an example of a non-Muslim? Is she a reaver? I don't know if she's a reaver, but she was non-Muslim. I think.
Yeah. On TikTok.
Pro-Palestinian lady, and she was completely raided. Whole house was everything taken just because she posts pro-Palestinian content. If you look at her content, she has for the probably past year posted a lot of pro-Palestinian content, speaking to a lot of people in Gaza. You see, she has a lot of interviews with Muslims in Gaza. I think that's what they had They wanted to see if she's got any links to Gaza. Maybe I don't know what the reasoning was behind this raid, but you can see that not even their own people are safe from these sort of prevent and contest and things like that. So if the normal person that's not even a Muslim is affected and attacked for their views, what's going to happen after when this comes in force? And that's why I was saying to them, just saying as a warning to say, this state or this country is, and all the Western countries are becoming Orwellian. They're becoming states where they pretend they're free and this and that, but really it's again another dictatorship. It's another way of forcing their values on us and then attacking us for our values. So we need to be wary of it. We need to really understand the game. We need to not go on platforms. That's what I was saying. We should have really boycotted from the first couple of guys going on Mohammad Hijab, Lowkey. After that, when you realize the agenda of how the questioning is going, there was no point really going on after that because, yeah, we saw what they were trying to do. But yeah, alhamdulillah. Well, I think everyone should read up on civil democratic Islam. They should read up the new Prevent guidelines. and they should just be a lot more politically aware, politically astute, and see the signs before it happens. That's the main takeaway of the article, really.
Yeah, no, it's a really important message, and even after listening and watching this um podcast, I definitely recommend reading it, because look, at the end of the day, what they're doing is they are trying to make certain concepts that are so key and fundamental in Islam. They are making them illegal, um, and the only way they're doing it is trying to link it to extremism. And in reality, who are the terrorists? We see what's happening in the world today. The
Mm,
fact that even from these TV shows, where somebody, they're asking, do you condemn what happened on October 7th? And then when the person on the other side asks, do you condemn what the IDF has been doing? And they can't. So
mm,
wait a minute, why are we even answering these questions?
mm.
And for me, this reminds me really, if anyone's done the history, World War II, this is a Gestapo style thought police, where
Yeah.
these societies are meant to be those who are free thinking. You can think what you want, you can hold whatever opinion. However, that's not true. And certainly when it comes to Muslims, but even as comes demonstrated, when someone who was supporting a Muslim cause, and she was humiliated, to be honest with you. And if you actually listen to what she says in the police station, they said, if you go out and denounce Hamas,
Yeah.
right, we will drop all charges. So the issue here wasn't even her links with anyone. It was to do with the fact that she was pushing a certain narrative, and they wanted her to do the opposite, right? So if that's happening to, English people and people who look like a bit, colored like us, you can imagine what's going to happen. And the thing is
Yeah.
this is a big question that we need to ask ourselves: how do we respond? Because ultimately, what they want, I think, is they have a noose around our necks, and I think through these type of legislations, and they tighten it slowly, slowly, slowly. And if we just stop saying what we need to say, just to stay within that noose and not
Mm.
to get, you know, hanged,
It's a good point.
then ultimately, generation, if you think about it from a generation point of view, every generation is going to concede more. It's going to concede
Yeah.
more. And what's the result at the end, bro? They're not targeting me and you, our generation.
Mm.
They're targeting in the future. There's going to be a generation of Muslims living in the West, and obviously in the Muslim lands, who will be secular. Now, the
Yeah.
problem is because Islam is so powerful, they can't go down the same secular route that they did through the Enlightenment period. They can't do that, right?
Mm.
It's got to be slow. It's got to be a bit forced. Like now they're like
Mm.
contesting, yeah,
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
push it a bit more. And their hope is that, okay, people like me and you will resist, but
Yeah.
in the future it will be normal to have these type of ideas about secularism.
Exactly. No, exactly. And I think it's important to notice that that lady that was sort of attacked, her audience was mainly non-Muslims, and that's why she entered a bubble of influence that the Muslims don't really penetrate, which are the non-Muslims. So when we do it, we don't really, we've done a lot worse than, well, in those in terms of our language, than that lady has, in terms of what we say, which is unacceptable to the West. Yet they don't attack us in that way because they know that our bubble is still within the Muslims, and the Muslims already know this stuff. But when you're trying to break out of that bubble, that's when they have a problem. So it was
Yeah.
interesting to see that.
Jazakallah khair, bro. Jazakallah khair. And I would definitely recommend everyone to check out the blog, and check out the Voice of the Ummah blog site. Anyway, I will add the links to the video, and also I'll add the link to the Civil Democratic Islam
Yeah.
report as well,
Yeah.
and any other sort of like links that we think will be useful. But it's really important as Muslims that we be alert. These things are happening. They are pushing this, and even if you're not worried about yourself, think about your future generations. On, do you want it to be as in a situation where, give it a couple of generations time where there's not a single sign of Islam in your you know, in your for the future generations, shall I say.
Mm.
But it's hard, you know, it's hard thinking about these type of things, but it's really important. But Kam, Jazakallah khair for joining the
Barakallah
podcast,
fiqh.
man. And
Barakallah fiqh.
I'll try getting you on a bit more regularly. I know that you're doing
Inshallah.
some other stuff as well on TikTok, and definitely I'll add the links to the video as well. Definitely check out Kam stuff. And as I said at the start, Kam is the tech guru of Voice of the Ummah, and Voice of the Ummah also, you know, they make their videos. We have, and I can say you know,
Yeah.
we have
Your face is
videos,
on it.
we have podcasts, you know, well, the podcasts are going to restart, inshallah, but blogs
Inshallah.
and all sorts of stuff, you know, it's really useful to be alert and understand what's happening
Yeah.
and then spreading the awareness.
Yeah.
That's something that we can all do.
Yeah. And if the listeners haven't got Telegram, get Telegram, because that's where the news is being unfiltered. So the only platform that you'll actually get new unfiltered news is Telegram, and we've got a VOTU Telegram page there as well. So if you follow us there, we don't spam as well. We only put really important stuff on, whereas you can get quite loaded with spam
Can
on
we share the
Telegram.
link for that?
Yeah, we can say the link for that as well.
As in, like, clickable, it'll open the app, I guess.
Yeah, it will open the app onto the VOTU page. Yeah. We can get the link for
Okay.
that.
Excellent, excellent. On that note, Kam, Jazakallah khair for
Barakallah fiqh.
joining me on this episode. And inshallah ta'ala, for everyone else, please make sure you subscribe, like the video, share your comments. I really want to know what you thought about this episode. If you've got any questions for Kam, you know, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I'm sure Kam will take some time out and respond to
Inshallah.
any questions. You know, whether you agree or disagree. You know, let's get a discourse going, and the discourse is uncensored, and there's no agenda. You know, we don't try to hide things. We got nothing to hide.
Exactly.
When you believe in falsehood, then you can't take on the truth firsthand, face to face. You always need to try using sly tactics, and that's what we see on these unleashed or uncensored silly programs. On that note, inshallah ta'ala, until the next one, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Assalamu alaikum.